Welcome to Northwest Digital News. I'm Kevin Hunter with Chris Bornstead and Kyle Torgeson here on a Round Table Friday. It is the first day of June. We expired May, guys. Made it through and survived.
Wow, it's already first day?
Yeah, it's the first day, June 1st. Well, kick us off with a weather report. And this better be good news, Kyle, or you're fired. You know, the Donald Trump light. You're fired.
So can we skip the weather? No, I'm kidding. So today's going to be a high of 69 and a low of 47. It's going to be cloudy. Again, clouds are going to be for the rest of the week. And it looks like it will rain Sunday, but after that it's going to be a bit sunny. The highest day, it looks like, is actually going to be this Saturday and next Friday with a high of 79. And then it looks like the lowest day is actually Monday with a low of 45.
Yeah. So we got some of your pool weather's coming back, Chris.
No, I don't see little pools on the thing there instead of sun jet.
Things that I'm
But that's
out.
okay.
Get in contact with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah.
Paying for better weather. Pools.
Pools.
Yes,
There
pools.
you go.
Pools.
It's a tall task, but
Yeah.
you're up for it, Kyle.
Well, I mean, contacting Kim Jong should be the easiest one on the list.
Be
I
the
mean,
easiest one,
He
yes.
hasn't responded.
yeah, still hasn't responded.
All right, well, we have a special guest in studio with us today. Earl Bowerman has joined us in studio. And Kyle, so if you'd add him in the frame and get rid of the... there we go. All right, well, thanks, Earl, for joining us here on Northwest Digital News. Glad to have you. And why don't you kick off our listening audience with a little introduction to yourself, who you are, where you come from, a little of your background.
All right. Well, my name's Earl Bowerman. I'm a candidate for Washington's 3rd Congressional District. A little bit about my background is I was raised in Arkansas on a small dairy farm, been in 4-H, FFA for many years, showed dairy calves at the local fair. And we lived in an area that was not very prosperous. Mm-hmm. And my father told me that the only way for me to go was with education. So I went to the University of Arkansas, did an undergraduate and master's degree in agriculture, went to Rutgers, did a PhD, and then joined the faculty at Texas A&M. Later, went to California State University, Fresno, and worked there for 25 years, and retired, and then did an import fruit and vegetable business for a few years when we were living in San Bernardino, California. After that, my wife and I decided that we were going to move to the Northwest, and we bought a home in 2009 and moved up here. Mm-hmm. So we've been up here a number of years.
Very nice. So before we move on, I have to just ask you a really quick question. This has to do with your years that you spent with Fresno. On Wednesday, we aired a show titled The Declining Value of College and University Degrees. And just wanted to get some quick feedback from you if you've seen this phenomena and if you're aware of maybe what are some of the things that have been happening inside the universities that you have observed as it pertains to education? Because it seems that fewer kids are going to college and fewer employers are putting emphasis on college and university degrees in their hiring practices. What do you think is maybe lending to that? And what's part of the problems with the breakdown in our education system?
Well, this is something that has been evolving over many years.
Correct.
And way back when I was going to school, there was an emphasis on math, the sciences, on the languages, some in literature, and civics. We learned a lot about government, and I remember studying that. And I think that there's been a movement to be inclusive. And so we have developed a number of courses in what we call general education, and some even in majors, where we study this or we study that really has not much to do, in my opinion, with the basics in education. Mm-hmm. For example, we have studies of various ethnic groups. You can major in studies of some religions. You can major in women's studies. And I'm not quite sure how that prepares one for the tools or gives them the tools that they need to carry on their life's work. Mm-hmm. So and this is just my personal belief, but I believe that some of our education has shifted towards an ideology. And this ideology is not that useful in the workplace. So I think that we need to get back to the basics where everybody has to take science, has to take math, has to be proficient in English and the other languages. The basics that we talked about when we had education at the lower level. I think part of the problem, and this is, again, my only opinion, I remember when Jimmy Carter put in the Department of Education. Today, that department has a budget of $80 billion, and the whole purpose was to raise the level of education in our country. Actually, the performance of the students on the standardized test over that many years and billions of dollars has gone down. I think education directed by the federal government in terms of what type of ideology that we should be following is wrong. And that's one of the things in my platform. I would not vote to fund the Department of Education because I think it's detrimental to the educational process in this country. And I think we're seeing the results of this now, where we have centralized decision-making for funding for across the country.
And it's really, as you mentioned, and it's been a long-standing opinion that I've had. I shared with you a little bit of some of my university experiences, even going to college. And I think that in the core elements of education, that unfortunately our institutions of higher learning have gotten further and further away from what that was.
And so now you look at a high school diploma, you question the value of it. You look at social promotion that we're seeing in our public school system. I question the value of that. So our standards have been set aside. And one of the things that's a personal complaint of mine is participation trophies.
Yeah.
And so I'm participating in your program today. Am I going to get a participation
Yes, we have a trophy that we set aside in the
trophy. Yeah. So
now, the problem is you give a trophy to everybody, but you should have one trophy that you give at the end of the season to your star guest. And that's what a trophy should mean.
I totally agree.
And then we go to Little League soccer or middle school soccer, and we don't keep score. Unbelievable. And so now that translates into, well, if I show up for class, I'll get a good grade.
Wait a minute, how do you play soccer without keeping score? I mean, somebody has to win. Otherwise, there's no point in playing the game. I mean, honestly. Well, I hear things and they alarm me, and
Can you imagine an NBA game where they don't keep score?
Well, they just throw the ball against the wall, or what? I mean, what? I mean, you have to have the point of a game.
But that's exactly what's going on in education. And there's some element of not keeping score because we don't want to offend anyone.
I'm all about offending people.
Last Monday, I actually went to a comedy club. There's like a fundraiser for this soccer team in Portland. It's actually not team, but like a foundation. It's really cool. But one of the comedians actually there used to play soccer, and he's made a comment about not keeping score. Well, he made a comment about how kids actually still keep score, and they still get mad over that.
Oh, yeah, the kids are going to keep score no matter.
It's mostly for the parents, really. The kids are still like, you're down by 1, it's your fault.
He's right, too. He's right.
And I think the kids know it's not real.
Yeah.
And that they're being deceived in some way.
No, I completely
things
agree.
have really changed. We had, speaking of participation and stuff like that, we had a person on one of our kids' team who approached the coach in the middle of the game saying, how come you're not playing my kid? And, how come you're not doing this and that? And, he's sitting there, listing all these reasons like, well, he's missed this many practices. He isn't showing up. He doesn't show any effort. And she couldn't grasp the things that the coach was telling him. The coach was getting frustrated because she's like, well, this isn't right. He should be playing just as much. And the coach finally had to look at her and say, you know what? We will talk about this after the game. But, I mean, if you go through the team text messages, this person was always missing the games, never showing up to practice, and then this parent was sitting there wondering why their child wasn't being able to be played.
It's a matter of talent. Can you imagine these talent shows that we have on TV now, like the singing shows? If they say, well, we got to be inclusive, so we're going to include you. What do you think would happen to the ratings if they had singers on there that...
They'd go right in the toilet. And
oh, come on, guys. We watch for the train wrecks.
I would love to hear Simon Cowell say, well, nice try. We're going to send you over to our little safe space and, bring you back in the process as we go along. No,
my son called me from Perry Tech. He's over there, and he the first week he was in the classroom, he picked up the phone and he called us, my wife and I, and he goes, they have a safe space here. What do I do?
But, we think this is funny, but it's actually serious.
Yeah, it's
It is very
It's
serious.
impacting on our electorate. And I think that there's some situations that are not taken seriously as they should be. And one is civic responsibility.
On the point of this whole thing of everybody needing a trophy and then this crowd of people that has put two words together that are very distinctly different, but that's equal and fair. And so in your situation, you were just describing, the parent was wanting the child to be out there, even though they hadn't put in equal time. They thought it was equal in terms of who should be able to play,
Right,
and equated that to fairness. And I want to give you an example of a description that I use. I actually stole it from Pat Riley years ago when he was coaching the LA Lakers. But he was asked about fairness and equality, and Pat Riley gave an example. He had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on his team, who was a Hall of Famer. He had Michael Cooper had just come up and joined the NBA from Indiana as a center on the team. And he put it this way. He said, there's 48 minutes in the game. Kareem will play 46. Michael will play 2. Is it equal? No. Is it fair? You're damn right it is. He goes, and I'd be run out of the Coliseum if I had Michael playing equal hours to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Equal minutes. He goes, it's people have to understand that those words are distinctly different. So let's talk about your run for, the U.S. Congress. You're running against Jaime Herrera Beutler. Share some of the distinctions between you as a candidate and her sitting as an incumbent you're both in the Republican Party. So share some of the distinctions.
We're both in the Republican Party, and I think that is the distinction. I am quite concerned about Republicans who run as Republicans and once elected vote with the Democrats. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that really upset me was previous to the 2016 presidential election, after Trump was a nominee and Hillary Clinton was a nominee, our Congresswoman announced that she would not be voting for President Trump. That had to thrill Hillary Clinton for a sitting Republican congressperson to announce that they would not support the Republican nominee. Then the other thing that Republicans have run on for years is Obamacare. Jaime recently voted to support Obamacare. When it was up for repeal and replace, she voted with the Democrats to keep Obamacare in place. That's another case of where you run as a Republican and you vote like a Democrat. She has voted to fund many spending bills. She voted many times to raise the national debt limit. She has voted with Democrats on funding Planned Parenthood. And let's talk about Planned Parenthood for a minute. A couple of years ago, I read a statistic where 339,000 abortions were performed by Planned Parenthood in 1 year. The definition of abortion is death to the fetus. Now, Republicans have stated many times that they would not vote to fund Planned Parenthood. Our Congress lady, Jaime, voted to fund Planned Parenthood. I think that's a violation of principle. I think that's a violation of who we say we are. I personally do not want my tax dollars to be funding an institution that performs abortion. So those are some of the main differences, but the thing that I want to emphasize is I'm the only candidate in this race that voted for Donald Trump. And
Chris actually has a question.
That was my question. I have a list of questions here, and I'll tell you how I got to those later, but that is one of my questions.
So what was your question?
Do you, if you are elected, will you support Donald J. Trump?
Oh, that's the reason I'm running, is I want to help him with his agenda. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to the White House and say, hi, I'm Earl Bowerman. I voted for you, and I'm looking forward to helping you get your agenda through Congress.
At which point he'll put his arm around you and say, come on in, Earl.
But I will tell you that in 2020, I intend to vote for Donald Trump. No questions about that.
I think there's a lot of, you're hearing more and more of that sentiment around the country. And interestingly enough, You must be familiar with Diamond and Silk. Have you heard of that? Well, there's several other, and then there's Candace Owen from Turning Point.
There's that Chris and Kevin guy.
Chris and Kevin.
I had to try.
Well, I was basically targeting these people because they were people who had a long, long history with the Democratic Party, and here in this last election became Trump supporters, and now are very vocal people with Trump supporters. And they said the way Diamond and Silk stated it, they said, we left the Democratic plantation.
Yeah, and because they were taken for granted.
Oh boy.
And they didn't want to be taken for granted anymore. And Trump is a people person. He believes in jobs. He believes in the dignity of work. And it's pretty easy to identify with that, because if we don't have jobs and we don't have personal dignity that's granted to us through jobs, what else matters? Very little. Some of this ideology kind of falls to the wayside. And that's the reason he was elected, is he believes in the working man, he believes in supporting working families, and he believes in lowering taxes so that we get to keep some of the money that we work for.
Can you believe people complained about that? I mean, everybody got a cut. and people were still complaining.
I don't understand people who are against cutting taxes. It's beyond me.
Well, I understand it if we are having a conversation about power and who's controlling people's lives. Then I understand why somebody says we don't want to cut taxes, we want to continue to grow government, because in that instance they want government to have the power.
Well, that's called swamp disease.
Yes,
and,
I agree.
And swamp disease is corruption through power, and it changes the way that a person thinks. And swamp disease develops slowly. You'll see it probably at the beginning of the second term. By the beginning of the third term, the symptoms are pretty prominent. And by the end of the third term or the beginning of the fourth, there's a full case of swamp disease. And basically, you define it as we forget who we're serving, which Washington we serve. And so we start serving special interests. We stop meeting with local constituents. And we are more concerned about what the leadership of the party is saying than what the leadership of the community groups are saying.
So here's another question that I'm going to pull right here.
Term limits.
So you would support term limits you would support Donald Trump on term limits?
Oh, that is one of my main points, is a cure for swamp disease is term limits. Because the first semester
This is my pro.
The first term is that we are in tune with the constituents. And I never saw Jamie for years until recently. I paid to go to an event, Lincoln Day dinner, and there she was. But she took no questions.
Yeah. Actually, there was somebody who asked a couple of questions of her on camera there at that location. And it's kind of interesting how that all got set up. Very interesting how that all got set up.
Again.
Yourself?
Woo! Yeah, I mean that was a bad deal, I think. But
Did you have a question about whoever's decision, who had made the decision?
Yeah, I mean,
next to a 3-time felon.
Yeah, that was I asked you that.
Yeah.
That was like, that's not good thinking, but
Yeah.
we know who did that.
Somebody hadn't really thought that through.
Nobody thought that through very well at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and actually a couple of the felonies were around domestic violence. So this is a person visiting with our congressman.
yeah, I remember when they made big deals about Obama and other congressmen around who they were surrounding themselves with, and the first thing that local Republicans did is put a 3-time violent felon in front of her to record and ask questions.
In an interview. So that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's talk about what going forward. Now, let's say if you proceed in this election, you're hoping for a top 2. Now, there's a number of people that are in this race. So let's look at some of the others that are out there. We're not going to get into the names of some of the others, but where do you think then? Obviously, we understand some of the distinctions between you and Jaime Herrera Beutler. What do you think are the distinctions that the public should be looking at in terms of making a Bowerman Herrera Beutler race in the end?
Well, I have been to probably 5 town halls that some of the other people have had that are in this race, mainly the Democrats, because I wanted to see where they stand. And their positions are really scary. And basically, they're in favor of larger government, more government spending, higher taxes. They're in favor of single payer insurance, and more control in terms of our daily lives. Because if you have health insurance and decisions are made in Washington about whether or not you're going to get this particular treatment, then that concerns me. So I think that they're mostly in favor of Washington control versus local control. And I think that includes education. I think that includes health care. I think that includes probably some types of local education versus higher education versus college education. Who's going to fund it? And I think that they're in favor of this ideology of giving participation trophies. Everyone's equal. So I hate to be extreme, but when I hear these, I think that they're out to make us equally poor. I think they're trying to exterminate the rich, and they use this they should pay their fair share. Well, let's look at this for a minute. 50%, well, first of all, there's a high percentage of people who pay no taxes. Of the people who pay taxes, 50% pay 2% of the taxes. The other 50% pay 98% of the taxes, just of the people who pay taxes. And then as we escalate that up, that's something like 10% of the people pay something like 80% of the taxes. Now, I don't know how much more the Democrats want to raise taxes on the wealthy, but once we exterminate the wealthy people, we're going to be equally poor. We're going to be without jobs, and we'll be like Venezuela.
You know, there is a country actually that has accomplished that and have actually met that threshold for a number of years, but it's North Korea, and
Cuba.
they have a society or class of people called the Danju in North Korea, and they're the 1% group of people who lead a life like a typical American, but they're considered the upper crust. But just, simple conveniences that Americans have in our daily life, and the other 99% live on roughly a $10 US dollars per month is their income. That's the other 99% of the population. So they've reached this level playing field, but it's not a playing field that anybody wants to be on.
Well, Margaret Thatcher said when you run out of other people's money, he's going to pay your bills. Yeah. And right now, there's a small percentage of well-to-do people paying the bills for a lot of other people. And I'm quite concerned with that. Let's talk about prosperity. Why not make everyone be prosperous rather than being equally poor? I don't understand the ideology of trying to depress successful people. I just don't get it. And I had a little import business, and I made a little bit of money, had to pay taxes. I had a C Corp, which was a mistake. My tax rate was 50%. Then I had to pay state taxes. By the time I got through doing all that, and I was risking a lot of money,
Yep.
And after looking at that, I thought, wow, my incentive is being killed by these taxes because I have high risk and high taxes, high overhead because of taxes. It's a real killer for business.
A major disincentive. Chris, did you have another question there?
I have a whole bunch of questions for him. I'm just waiting for the right time to do it. And basically, what I did is I went to one of your opponent's pages, and I read a statement that she made about talking to her constituents and reading all their letters. And then I went through and I saw how all these complaints about them and all these questions and stuff like that. And then I noticed that your opponent is not engaging with these people. So I wrote down some of the questions that they're asking. Since she won't answer them, maybe we can get you to answer them. Okay. And these are coming from voters out, in the district that you're running for.
When you say opponent, you're speaking of
the current elected position, the sitting congresswoman. So this comes from her page.
Won't answer
Right. She won't answer any of these questions online to her constituents. She just drops a post that she's working hard for them and that she's reading the letters, but won't engage with the people that are on her page asking her questions. So one of the questions that came up quite a bit was this toll bridge nonsense that you guys are looking at in Clark County. Can you explain? Yeah, can you explain a little bit of that to me and what your stance is on the tolling?
The question to Herrera Beutler was, "Do you support this toll nonsense?"
Well, that wasn't the question. That was my question. I think it's nonsense, but it's just.
That sounds like a leading question.
It sounds like they want to milk Washington residents for coming to Oregon, but that's just my thinking.
But first of all, on the tolls, they're talking about two federal highways, Highway 205 and Highway 5. These are federal highways. The state of Oregon cannot get permission, do not have local control over the tolling of those highways. So what they're trying to do is put together a proposal that will be sent to Washington for approval or for disapproval. Now, right now, the law says on federal highways, you cannot put tolling on existing highways unless it is a lane for carpooling. So they could do that, but they cannot put a toll on the other lanes unless it's new construction. So before they can toll it, they've got to build new highways. Now they've got to get the federal government to do that. So I can see a situation in which our representative would go to the White House and say, Mr. President, we would like for you to oppose the tolling here on Highway 5 and 205. And he would say, who are you again? You opposed me in the general election. Now you're wanting me to help you out? That concerns me a lot.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. And so it's a federal issue, and Oregon is just trying to get permission to do that. I would go to the White House and say, President Trump, I voted for you. We need help because there are 77,000 Southwest Washingtons that cross the Columbia River every day to work in Oregon. And they're trying to take more of our money, and we already pay income tax in Oregon and get no of the services from Oregon, and now they want more of our money. Would you please help us oppose this and not approve it? Because that's where it's got to be decided in the Department of Highway Transportation. And so I would definitely oppose any tolls in Oregon because I think it's totally misrepresents. And I see that they want to use the tolling money not for a highway improvement, but for services that are offered in Oregon, particularly in Portland.
Another question that Chris has here.
This is a huge one.
Town halls.
This is the biggest, the one that is repeated over and over and over again is access to the Congresswoman. She has none. So town halls, exactly.
Yeah. How can you be a representative and not meet with the constituents, not meet with the people, not hear what they're saying, not having town halls? In fact, there was a town hall that was held over in Pacific County, I believe it was. She didn't show, and they put up a cardboard image of her for her representative. And the newspaper headline was, Jamie was a no-show. So they put up the cardboard image. Well, that's an insult to constituents. That's an insult to Southwest Washington. And that's a major symptom of swamp disease.
Chris, are you going to get a cardboard cutout, that we can put here on the broadcast? You have some scheduled content.
Mondays, yeah.
Are you going to get a cardboard cutout for us to use?
Yeah, but he probably wouldn't say much, though.
So you could act like you were here, not here.
Not really here.
I mean, technically, I could just put an image of him up on the screen.
That's right. I mean, we don't even have to do that. It's kind of like similar to the moon landing, right?
And I can just crop, the tinfoil hat as per se,
Yeah, you could just be here. Yeah.
I think a cardboard image at a town hall meeting creates a FUD problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. We're joking.
Yeah.
You know what the FUD syndrome is?
Tell us.
Fear, uncertainty.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's clear that she doesn't interact with her constituents because they're kind of hostile towards her from the comments that I'm reading. So one of the other questions that we're seeing on Heroes a lot, and I know it's a local one that weighs heavy on the minds of a lot of my friends, is what are your thoughts on solution for the current sea lion problem we're facing? That is one that actually came up just almost as much as the town halls.
Well, when the 1972 Marine Mammals Protection Act was passed, there were 10,000 sea lions. Today, there's 300,000.
Wow.
And they're beginning to have an impact on the ecosystem. And that's one of the reasons why they're swimming up the river. The Columbia River is not a natural habitat for them. But there's so many of them, it's mostly the males are coming up the river because the females are staying with the nursery areas. They're coming up the river because the salmons are easy prey, particularly where they congregate at the dams. Now, this 1972 law was modified a number of times, but most recently it was modified that gives permission to Oregon and Washington to lethally remove the sea lions. They already have the authority. It was modified probably 6 or 8 years ago. And even the state of Washington has put out a pamphlet about control of sea lions, and it mentions that modification. So what Jaime has proposed is more legislation where you get a permit, you can kill only 100 sea lions a year. That's a drop in the bucket, and it's not needed. We already have permission. So I think that is political for her to do that.
Sure.
So I think that the state of Washington and Oregon need to gear up and start removing the sea lions in a lethal manner because they're smarter than dogs. If you remove them in such a way that it creates mayhem among the sea lions, they'll stop coming up the river. And
So you're saying that we can train them to not come up,
scare the heck out of
right?
them.
Okay.
To not come up.
Kind of
like deer during hunting season.
And then they can be harvested also because they have value commercially.
Yes.
For their pelts and so on.
Well, maybe we could encourage sea lion steaks, sea lion stew, sea lion, all these different
whole new
shish
restaurant.
kebabs, all these, in all the different restaurants that
It
are in
has a
there.
sweet flavor. It's kind of like bear meat.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot that could be added to the restaurant menus that are out there.
Well, I'm not in favor of exterminating the sea lions, but I think they need to be controlled and our numbers monitored because there's hundreds of thousands of them now, and killing a few hundred or a few thousand in the Columbia River is not going to endanger the species.
Exactly. I want to move on to another subject, and part of the reason I want to take the opportunity to do this is we've had a fair amount of conversation on this show about climate change, about global warming, about CO2 gases. You come from an educational background, even a teaching perspective, in which this is all stuff you're very familiar with. So you shared a little analogy before on what percentage of the total atmosphere that CO2 actually represents and what some of the implications would be if there's even a small reduction of that. If you would share that analogy with our listening audience.
Well, carbon dioxide is a miracle gas. It gives us life. It gives life to the planet. And so it's something to be treasured. It's non-toxic, it's tasteless, it's odorless, it's colorless. And so it is very necessary for plant growth. For photosynthesis. Mm-hmm. So as you increase the carbon dioxide level, like in a commercial greenhouse where we're producing, say, tomatoes, you grow larger tomatoes, your plants grow faster, the tomatoes have more uniform shape and color and so on, and you have a larger crop. Now,
so applying that to the atmosphere in general, as CO2 goes up, we would also see a more green countryside.
The carbon dioxide would be incorporated into plant growth. It would be reduced from the atmosphere, and you would have a much more lush plant growth.
Very good. Okay, so share how small that actual percentage is and what the implications are of even a small reduction of...
Well, it's 4 10,000s. So if you had 10,000 houseflies or buzzing around in your
That'd
room,
be a lot of houseflies.
A lot of houseflies. Only 4 of those houseflies are carbon dioxide. Mm-hmm. So if you just killed off one of these carbon dioxide flies, probably the surface of the earth would freeze. Why? Because carbon dioxide helps regulate the temperature of the earth. Mm-hmm. And so we don't want to get the carbon dioxide level too low. And in fact, I think it's impossible for man to regulate carbon dioxide in terms of meaningful ranges. I read the other day that the volcanoes are going off produce enough carbon dioxide that it would take whatever man is trying to do 100 years to reduce the carbon dioxide enough that it would be equal to the amount given off by the volcanoes. So really, I think it's an ideology when we start talking about carbon dioxide, and not so much as practical, because you cannot demonstrate or you cannot perform a repeatable experiment where you can directly attribute the variation in carbon dioxide by man activities, because there's too many things in reducing carbon dioxide, there's too many things giving off carbon dioxide. And as I look at you presently, you're giving off carbon dioxide.
Exactly.
And you should be quite concerned if you believe that it's man-made.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that when I look at the data that has been put out by scientists, environmentalists, people that have been tracking this for a number of years, I think it's really interesting that we've seen the level, and if you would, Kyle, pop up the chart that's on the wall here. This is the 800,000 years, and I think that this one even goes back further, doesn't it? The 800,000 years of global warming and cooling. And when we look at this particular chart, and we look back 100,000 years, we see heat spikes in terms of total atmosphere that are higher than what we're at now, quite substantially higher. And then two other points that go back, 80,000 years. Whether we can believe this data or not, I'm not saying that it's believable data. I'm simply saying that scientists are publishing this data. What then does it tell us about the heating and or cooling cycles that we're in the midst of right now?
Well, it's caused by factors other than man. And if you go way back, carbon dioxide was as much as 3 and 4 and 5 times the level that it is today.
I heard that, yes.
Yes, and so it fluctuates greatly. The ocean is a buffering system. Plants are a buffering system. So there's many things that's taking carbon dioxide out of the air. But these forest fires that we've been seeing around here in the last year or so, they give off immense amounts of carbon dioxide, much more than man would ever give off. So there's factors way beyond our control in many different places that happen naturally or man-made that give off carbon dioxide and tie up carbon dioxide.
We were having conversation about the efforts that we make here in the United States to control the contributions of pollution to to global pollution, if you'd put it that way. And I thought this is Chris made the comment on one of these broadcasts that we over mitigate, we over control this whole component. And what's interesting is that compelled me to go and do a little bit of research. And I was looking for, the United States has all these various problems, and we're, like one of the leading industrial nations on the planet. Where should we fit then relative to total global pollution? And I look up the top 25 most polluting countries in the world, and the United States is not on it. And I went, okay. And then I start looking at, again, I'm a statistician, not an environmentalist, but I'm looking at the stats of where the top country is, the second place, the third place, the fourth place, and the fifth place. And I'm going, those 5 countries are doing more in the way of pollution than all the rest of the countries on the list combined are. Yeah. And then we take this top 25, and I know from data that I collect from Yahoo and Google, and there's 220 countries and territories in the world. So that top 25, we take them out, now it leaves 195 left, right? And the U.S. is one of those remaining 195. What are we possibly going to do in this country that would combat if man-made pollution is what's contributing to all of this? What would we possibly be doing? The other 195 countries, it seems like it would make more sense for somebody who has an environmental passion to go to Pakistan or India or Africa, one of these countries in which the pollution is just off the charts.
Well, you just justified Trump's withdrawal of the United States from the what did they call the Paris Accords, the global Accords. That was totally justified because it made no sense. And it also makes no sense to have these carbon tax, where you can give money to the government and buy a license to pollute or let off carbon dioxide and other things. All of that is ridiculous. And I don't know how much it was costing the United States to participate in these climate accords, but it was billions of dollars that we were paying for nothing. And I was so thrilled when he pulled out because it was meaningless. We are not one of the major polluters.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty interesting stuff. Well, what would you like to leave our voters with a closing thought on why they should be considering Earl Bowerman instead of either the sitting congresswoman or any of the competition that's out there in this upcoming election?
Well, I believe in principles. I believe in staking with your principles and not violating them. So if you say that you're a Republican and that you will vote a particular way, there are no surprises. You vote as you say you are going to vote. And I believe in integrity. I don't believe that there are situational politics in which you set aside your principles. So I'm a conservative Republican, and I will vote like a conservative, and I am for jobs. That's my principal thing, because I think that's most important, because people are important too. Mm-hmm. And so I think we've got to have jobs and the dignity that goes with jobs and being able to support your families. I will vote against funding the Department of Education. I think $80 billion is pretty much wasted there. Mm-hmm. I probably would vote against the Department of Energy. I think that's a private enterprise affair, that we don't need government directing private enterprise in terms of developing our energy. I think we should be energy independent, and Trump is moving us this way. I totally support what he's doing there. And I believe in loyalty. I believe when you've got a choice between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, that you don't thrill Hillary Clinton by announcing that you are going to vote against Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. I think principles come into play here. And I think that Trump is right. I think we should put the United States first. I think we should put American interests first. I believe in making America great again is a wonderful, wonderful embrace of who America is and what we stand for.
Mm-hmm. And it was actually a slightly different phrase of that, but it's not a new phrase that Donald Trump is using. That was actually also Ronald Reagan used that when he was running for.
He is going to get some originality in there, because 2020 is going to be keep America great again, and nobody's used that.
Yeah, keep America great. Yes.
Yeah, nobody's used that one yet.
If you look on my webpage, there is a picture of Ronald Reagan with my wife. And when I was
the webpage up in the background.
When I was at Texas A&M, I was one of the faculty advisors to a group of students called Political Forum. Mm-hmm. And one of the visitors we had was Ronald Reagan. And my wife and I had an opportunity to spend about 10 minutes with him one-on-one. And it was a really, really nice experience. Mm-hmm.
Man, you have 10 minutes with Reagan. What do you talk about? I mean,
well, my wife is a charming person, and he was so taken, he put his arm up around when I made the picture.
Very nice.
And that was many, many years ago.
Very nice. Which one of these tabs is it on?
I'm not sure.
Kyle, you can look for that. And we'll share that with our
we did leave out a couple of important questions. I don't know if we have time for them or not. That's up to you. There's two issues that are really huge for a lot of people right now, and one of them is the homelessness and the opioid problem that we're having.
And what was the other one? Opioid?
Oh yeah, opioid.
Homelessness and the opioid
epidemic. Just real quick, what are your thoughts on both of those? A lot of people like to combine those two subjects. I do not. They're separate. And so maybe you could.
Well, this gets back to jobs. When you don't have a job, you lose your dignity. And I don't know of anyone that's homeless that has the dignity that they would have if they had a job. The unemployment rate's what now, 3.9 or 3.8%? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of this has to do with personal responsibility and personal choice. Now, there are some people that are not capable of holding a job for various reasons, but I'm not talking about that group. Mm-hmm. But I think that there are a number of people, because of government services that are available, kind of choose to be homeless. I'm not saying that's the case across the board, but as a federal issue, I think it's not. I think it's a local issue that has to be solved by local politicians. And It's always a people problem. Why are there more homeless people in one city and not another? It's due to policies of the local community. And so I think that there's not a position for the federal government in the homeless problem. As far as opioids, again, probably is a matter of having dignity, because when you lose your dignity, you turn to get depressed, and depression can lead to these problems. Now, I believe that we should have programs where they can go for help, and they can get into a program of several months where they're coaxed. But it again boils down to personal choice. It's always about personal choice. I don't care if it's eating disorder. I don't care if it's anorexia. I don't care if it's methanones or something like that. It's always a personal choice. But I think there should be programs to help them seek help. But there's not a magic pill, and money is not the cure. In other words, throw more money at. Let's have more money and more money.
Like Seattle's head tax.
But we do need facilities where they can go for help. If they want to get off, they can give them coaching and providing. But you can't force them to go get help. It has to be a personal choice. I want off, and they go seek it.
I think, your response about homelessness being solved at the local level, I think you're absolutely 100% correct on that. Because what we're seeing here in Washington State is we're seeing that Seattle is doing it one way, and then we see that all of these people that work for the government all want to do it like how they're doing it in Seattle, and they're failing. They're absolutely failing. They're actually creating more homeless with their policy, like you said. So I definitely agree that it should be up to the local jurisdictions to clean this mess up.
I think it's unbelievable that they're putting on a head tax, and they're going to give it to the homeless people. Well, that doesn't cure anything. If I were homeless, I'd come to Seattle.
Yeah.
And then they send you down here to Kelso because we've got, a local organization down here in Longview that will put them up and give them free housing, free food, free anything they want. All you have to do is go to the internet and post what you need, and a bunch of people will give it to them.
It's like a participation trophy.
Yep.
Well, we are out of time here on our broadcast of Northwest Digital News, so we're going to leave it there. But a special thanks to Earl Bowerman for joining us here in studio. You can find Earl on the web, earlbowerman.com. And, of course, anybody who wants to get links or transcripts to this show, you can find it on our Facebook page, Facebook group, on YouTube, on Patreon, and on Twitch TV.
I believe Kyle said that if you want a transcript, he will type it all out for you, and he'll have it done by Monday.
Perfect. There you go.
So
all right.
You have to find an old typewriter first, though.
Yeah. All right, so
we give Kyle the impossible task.
I want to make sure that we cover here before we go. Coming up on June 22nd, 23rd, 24th is the Rusty Scuppers event over in Westport. A great family-friendly event, and you're going to see a new pirate ship out there, sponsored by Northwest Digital News and with our local R Pirates. So you're going to see that on the water there. It's in the making right now over at my place. So it's very cool.
I keep hearing about it.
Yes.
Well, watching on Twitch and Facebook or whatever, give us a like or a follow, share it. Helps us with a reach, and it's pretty great.
And if you like what you're seeing and hearing here on the broadcast, you can go to Patreon and become a contributor.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, and contributor also to my campaign would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely give him money. Yeah.
So they can do that at your your website, earlbowerman.com.
Yeah.
I did pin the comment in Facebook, so if you'd like to go, it's going to be there 24/7.
All right. So the link to the website is in the thread below. Well, that's going to do it here for our broadcast on Northwest Digital News. I'm Kevin Hunter, Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgerson, joining us here for a Roundtable Friday. Till next time, take care.